Hello, and welcome. I'm Meron Khalili. We are DM25, a radical political movement for Europe, and this is another live discussion featuring subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And today we're talking about the AI shockwave that has sent Silicon Valley into panic mode. DeepSeek, a Chinese startup that barely existed 2 years ago, has just matched America's top AI models while being open source, running on Chinese-made chips, and costing a fraction of the price. Yes, DeepSeek's new model has shattered the myth that China lags behind the US in AI, and it's exposed just how inflated and overhyped America's AI industry was. Within hours of its release, it wiped out nearly $1 trillion in US tech stock value. Now, look, this is a big deal, and it goes beyond even the US versus China story, because AI isn't just about chatbots, the kind of things we may be using on a daily basis. It's the backbone of industries, shaping economies and societies. Who controls AI could control the course of the world. So what does this moment really mean? Does DeepSeek's rise truly challenge the real power of today's tech empires? Is AI finally shifting towards open access, or just reinforcing control in new ways? And how can we, as activists, fight back against those who want to dominate this space? Well, I'm delighted to have with me, of course, our own Yanis Varoufakis talking about these things, but we've also got Arnaud Bertrand, the entrepreneur who tweets too much, based in Malaysia, who will be weighing in today. And we've got you out there. If you've got thoughts, comments, rants, anything you want to say about AI, DeepSeek, OpenAI, Sam Altman, anything, put it in the YouTube chat and we will put it to our panel. Let's kick it off with Yanis.
Thank you, Meron. Before I say another word, it's a great honor and a great pleasure to be meeting Arnaud, even in 2 dimensions on my screen for the first time, and to be sharing this platform. Thank you, Arnaud. I'm very much looking forward to a discussion. I've been following you on Twitter, on Substack, here, there, and everywhere. We are in the company of a very significant commentator on all those matters that Meron introduced us to. Okay, DeepSeek, a historic event, what we saw unfolding over the last week or so. And it is historic for 2 reasons, because it combines 2 poignant and highly significant stories. One story is that this is our generation's Sputnik moment. When in the 1950s, the Russians totally unexpectedly were the first ones to go to space with Sputnik. The United States, that had managed to convince themselves that we're far ahead of the rest of the world in space technology, were absolutely shattered and shocked, emotionally, psychologically, ideologically, that the Soviet Union, that was struggling to produce enough plows, cow-driven plows, until a few years before, suddenly had gone to space before them. And of course, we saw what happened after that, the escalation of the space race, the arms race, and the Cold War. So this is another Sputnik moment, because up until last week, both American government and big tech, Silicon Valley, did assume that China was eons behind them in developing artificial technology. And DeepSeek comes in with a very cheap model, which is just as effective, maybe more efficient than Altman's much hyped ChatGPT. So this is one dimension, the Sputnik moment. But there's another dimension, and we must not fall into the trap of only looking at the first dimension. The first dimension, just like it was between the Soviet Union and the United States in the 1950s, concerns a kind of race towards AI success between the United States and China. The second dimension is very different. We have to remember that as good leftists, we must not forget that, trade wars and these races between large economic blocs are deep down class wars. In other words, they are happening as class wars and as trade wars within those economic blocks. Let me explain a bit more cogently what I mean by that. There are two kinds of corporations in the United States and in China, but let's focus on Silicon Valley now, that use algorithms, that use algorithmic capital, what I call cloud capital in my book, in my recent book that most of you have heard me talk about. There is a cloud capital that is being used in order to produce the algorithms, the platforms of big tech like Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Okay, that all requires algorithmic or cloud capital to be built. And then there are companies like OpenAI that produce, using more or less the same technology, they produce a straightforward capitalist service. So what is the difference between, let's say, this, the Google Assistant, and what DeepSeek did or what OpenAI do with their DeepSeek, with their GPT, ChatGPT? The difference is that the latter, ChatGPT and DeepSeek, provide you with a commodity. They provide you with a service which is commodified. There's a market for it. There are competing providers, suppliers, and you choose which one you want on the basis of price, of quality, of brand resonance, whatever. It is in that realm that DeepSeek dealt a major blow at American cloud capital, because Sam Altman was banking on huge revenues from selling in that market the services of his AI bot. He was vulnerable to that kind of intrusion by DeepSeek because he was competing at the marketplace. He was selling something. Whenever you sell something, a competitor may appear out of nowhere and sell the same thing cheaply, more cheaply, or both in a better quality and a lower price. But what lives inside the Google Assistant, the Siri interface of Apple phones, Amazon's Alexa, and so on, what lives in there is not a supplier to you of some commodity, which, like every other commodity, comes with a price at the marketplace. When you are in Facebook, in Instagram, in TikTok, you're not buying anything. You are a user who's being used. You are posting stuff. You are training the interface, whether it's a Google Assistant or Siri or Amazon's Alexa. You're training it to train you, to give it better information so that it can impress upon you, its capacity to give you good advice on what music to listen to, what books to buy, what electric bicycles to purchase. And then it sells it to you once you have formed that desire for what it has instructed you or guided you to desire. It sells it to you directly outside a market process, because Amazon is not a market, it's a platform. And how does Bezos, the Amazon owner, benefit from that? By charging up to 40% of the price you pay, effectively creaming off, siphoning off whatever surplus value has been produced in the capital sector that has produced this item. Now, that sector, what I call the techno-feudal sector, is not threatened by someone like DeepSeek, because it's not a market. It's not a capitalist market. It's what I call techno-feudalism. It's outside the realm of capitalism, of the capitalist marketplace as we understand it. So, to wrap up, DeepSeek created the Sputnik moment, but it also created a major clash of prospects within the cloud capital sector in the United States, but also in China. Essentially, companies like OpenAI were severely damaged. Their profitability, long-term profitability, their net present value collapsed But companies like Amazon, if anything, were strengthened because these technologies, which allow us through DeepSeek or ChatGPT to ask them to draw pictures for us or to write essays for us, whatever, these same reinforcement learning algorithms that DeepSeek uses, once fused with the cloud capital of Alibaba, the Chinese version of Amazon, or Amazon, that enhances the power of cloud capital to modify our behavior and therefore to afford its owners, the owners of Amazon, for instance, or Alibaba, a greater capacity to extract rents from the rest of the economy.
Thank you, Yanis. Arnaud, I'd love your reaction to what Yanis just said and any other details on DeepSeek that you'd like to focus on.
Sure. So yeah, I agree with Yanis that it is a Sputnik moment in the impact that it had on the US, the Silicon Valley, the US economy, and so on. There is one way in which it differs with Sputnik, is that Sputnik, as we know, created an arms race or space race. Whereas what's really interesting with DeepSeek is that is the open source aspect, meaning China basically gave, if it was an arms race, you wouldn't give the weapon that you just created, which is as good as or even better than your competitor's weapon. You wouldn't give it to them with all the manuals on how to use it, recreate it, and so on. So in that way, I think it is fundamentally different from the Sputnik moment, in that far from, I think, triggering an arms race, is trying to stop it. It's trying to veer AI towards a different dynamic from seeing it as an arms race, which is the way those companies in the US, OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on, tried to do it. They tried to make it an arms race, with them having closed model that is developed in secrecy, and where they want to reach a point where basically they have developed those weapons, those arms, and because of that they have technological superiority over the rest of the world, on China in particular. China is saying, no, we want to, DeepSeek is, what DeepSeek is doing effectively is saying, no, we don't want that approach for AI. We want more of a global collaboration, scientific approach where we've released what we develop in open source, and then you improve on it, and it's a global collaborative effort, basically. So it's a more democratized view of AI versus the close view of ironically named OpenAI. So I think that's a very important aspect here, and that's why, by the way, so much value, I think, was destroyed in the stock market, because, as Yanis rightly said, it completely undermined the business model of OpenAI. In a way, we're a bit like at the beginning of the internet, because I do think that AI, to a large extent, might replace the internet. I myself, for instance, maybe you guys as well, have stopped using Google, right? There is no need for Google, for instance, when you have a great AI that can answer all the questions that you have. So there are large portions of the internet that will be taken over by AI. And the vision of OpenAI was, we're at the beginning of the internet, and we're a company that's going to have, the whole internet privatized. And DeepSeek arrives, and offers a free internet. So that changes everything, and of course, that really dismantles their hopes on business model and changes the whole economics of the field, which is why it destroyed a lot of future value. So yeah, and another interesting aspect, I think, is the whole China-US geopolitical competition, because first of all, there was this cheap export controls measure that were done by the US on China, and basically the hope with those cheap export control is mostly about AI. I think that is the calculus of the US. They know that it is not sustainable in the long run because China is putting enormous efforts to catch up with chips. So they know that if you look 10, 15 years from now, China is eventually going to catch up. But the hope is that in the short term, in the next 3 to 5 years, because of their superiority in chip technology, the US is going to be able to develop superior AI model that will allow them to basically take a lot of leapfrog China and leave that behind on AI in a major way. And what China showed is with DeepSeek is that it is right there, despite those cheap export control, it is right there because they released. The latest model of OpenAI was released in November, I think, and DeepSeek was released in January, and it's on par, if not better than OpenAI o1, that model. So yeah, it changes the calculus on this as well. Because it means that the cheap export controls and the assumptions around that probably need to be reassessed too. So it changes a lot of things in both the geopolitical field and the whole economic future of tech in the US.
Thank you, Arnaud. Just a couple of quick questions comments really from the chat. It's around the issue of censorship. DeepSeek collects keystroke patterns, cross-device uses, sends it all to China, etc. Teachers around the world are warning students away from DeepSeek for so many reasons. Italy, I believe, has already banned DeepSeek. Several US states. This is a parenthetical point, I know, but I would just, as I hand it over to you, Yanis, I mean, could you tackle that issue there? That this is not actually free. This sort of US talking point that when you search for Tiananmen Square, you don't get the accurate result, which is true, incidentally. But I know that's not exactly the point, is it? With regard to DeepSeek,
you are talking to somebody who has the 3-point surveillance by the NSA. We are talking in the West where Google, Facebook, remember Cambridge Analytica? Do I need to remind people of Cambridge Analytica? Take everything we do, everything we think of, every move we make, and commodify it, classify it, cross-reference it. Now, do I want my data, my searches to be stored by some Chinese company somewhere? No. But if we want to have a conversation about socializing and democratizing cloud capital, yes, let's have it. But I laugh my head off when I hear this being waged at DeepSeek, when on the other hand we have Zuckerberg, who not only through Cambridge Analytica, we know what he's done with our data, but he's also in the White House celebrating the new coronation of Donald Trump. So get off, folks. This is a major moment. As Arnaud said, we have DeepSeek came here and said, all right, you want to use the internet in order to make inquiries and to ask for intelligent answers. Well, here you can do it for free, as Arnaud said. This is open source. Instead of paying an arm and a leg to some altman, and also be surveyed by them while you're paying for them or paying them. If I may take what Arnaud said and take it a little bit further. Yes, everything that Arnaud said is right. So you have this Chinese company which essentially tells the world, here is my code, here, this is how it works, emulate it, take it away, which is brilliant. It's not far off in concept to a pharmaceutical company giving away the formula for some antibiotic or some vaccine, right? Like once it happened with polio, unlike COVID-19. So that's absolutely brilliant. But allow me, and this is not being critical, but I want to bring another dimension that involves geostrategic interests and the rivalry between China and the United States. Before DeepSeek came out, I've been doing some research into how AI research was proceeding in China over the last few years and how it was proceeding in the United States. In the United States, it was a pure commodification process. How can we create a service that will be in high demand and therefore utilize our monopoly position to extract the maximum rents or profits from the people who would actually buy that service. In China, as I said, this is something that I encountered before DeepSeek came out and surprised us all. Research on AI was not consumer-oriented. There was no attempt to create AI in order to sell the capacity to draw pictures and write essays to students and to professionals and common people out there. AI in China was always being developed in the context of the production process of other goods and services. It was always integrated with industry. And, the most interesting AI projects that I came across in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, and so on, were projects that were all in the business of making the production of wind turbines better, of making it easier to produce hydrogen from electricity, of integrating AI systems in the manufacturing process of intermediate goods. Yeah? In the United States, it was all about how do we beat Google at the game of searching, and how can we, make a quick buck by getting people to subscribe and pay high subscription prices in order to get their questions answered. Now, I don't claim to know what the objectives were the aims behind DeepSeek and so on, but even if we don't have any information about that, it's really easy, it's simple to note that by releasing DeepSeek and its code, essentially, the Chinese way of doing AI won, and the American way of doing AI lost, because there is not going to be anymore such a lucrative trade in the services of AI answer providers. Now, Donald Trump claims to be interested in bringing back manufacturing to the United States. Well, good luck to him. The question is, will Silicon Valley be integrated with American industry in the way that Chinese AI is being integrated with Chinese manufacturing industry? Now, for that, you need a centrally planned economy or some kind of an investment plan, something that the United States does not have outside its industrial military complex. It does have it within the industrial military complex. So the question is are they going to catch up? Or are they going to stay in this game of trying to make a quick buck by serving the consumer sector?
Thank you, Yanis. And as I hand it over to you, I know you've spent several years in China. I know you're based in Malaysia now, but you've written, if you've been to China and the US, you feel much more innovation in China. If the US invents so much technology, where does it go in real life? In China, you see it everywhere and every day. So as we're looking at the kind of route causes for this leapfrog that China has just made. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate more on that and give us your take.
Yes, sure. Let me just, if you allow me, just coming back on what Yanis said. So, yeah, I think he pointed out an absolutely crucial point, and I'm really surprised that not that many people speak about that. I think that at the end, it's not AI per se that's important. We will arrive at some point where it's probably going to be commoditized. What matters is what we do with it, the applications of it. It's like electricity, right? It's a new technology. And it's not so much the technology that in itself that matters. It is an enabler, and what matters is what we're going to do with that. And so I think that is also part of the strategic calculus by China. It understands that the power is not so much in the AI, but in the network, right? In like electricity, and that might be why they're releasing DeepSeek for free in open source, because then it allows them to spread the network much faster based on their own technology, as opposed to a closed model where you need to pay more, and then you have less flexibility in how you can change it, and so it's inherently less attractive. So I think that aspect is very important, and that we spend way too much time speaking about the AI itself and not what we're gonna do with it. Just on another point also on the censorship. So it's true that when you go to DeepSeek.com, the model that you see is censored because it is hosted in China, but the whole point of DeepSeek is again the open source, meaning that anyone, you, me, can download the model and make what we want with it. Anyone can even download the model and make it into an AI that's makes anti-China propaganda or anti-communist propaganda on a daily basis, and you can do that. It's allowed because it is under the MIT license, where you can do whatever you want with it. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And of course, when you download it and run it on your own computer, your own server, and so on, the data does not go to China. You can even run it on your computer without any internet connection, and it's still going to work. So the data only goes to China when you use it on the Chinese website, right? And then finally, I come to your question on innovation in China. It's true that when you go to China today, innovation feels much more part of the daily life than it does in the West. I think a big part of the answer why is because China basically developed later, so it was built with later technology and so on. But also I think that things move much faster and China is much more competitive in tech. So, if you take just EV, for instance, at some point there were 500 EV companies competing in China, which is incredible, as opposed to, I don't know how many in the West, but maybe just a handful. And so you have this extreme competition. That means that either you innovate and you differentiate yourself from the competition, or you die. And so you constantly have these new products, these new innovations that come. It's a much more dynamic environment than it is in the West.
Thank you, Arnaud. Just something to add to what you said regarding censorship. even today with the China-hosted version of DeepSeek, the answer you get when you ask about the genocide in Gaza is a lot more detailed and a lot more truthful than the answer you get today from ChatGPT, GPT-4. So, a couple of quick comments from the chat. The US institutions charge you to spy on you and steal your creative labor and data. What a cynical, hypocritical, misanthropic joke they are, claiming Chinese software spies on users. And Nick says DeepSeek may force Sam Altman, the founder and CEO of OpenAI, to downgrade his $2 million Koenigsegg to a Honda Civic. There is something really there, isn't there? As I hand it over to you, yeah, it's about this culture that in the US of putting people on pedestals. I've heard so much about Sam Altman. He's the deal maker, like a demigod, who's just wafting through this mortal realm, advancing the whole planet. And suddenly, this guy, I don't even know his name, the founder of DeepSeek, runs it as a side project and comes out with this enormous challenge to what OpenAI has put out. I wondered if there's anything more you'd like to add on that comment with regard to culture in China, some of the economic decisions that they have taken over the last few years that might have facilitated or enabled this, the development of AI in this, because they were not known for software, really, at least not in the West, that they were so advanced, and it was quite a surprise. But maybe that's just my Western-centric point of view coming out there.
Well, I think it is because they've been at it, at designing software for a very long time now, and they've been very good at it for a very long time now. But of course, AI is different. It's a different kind of software, and that is where we were surprised because we didn't know that they had managed with, despite the shortage of microchips, maybe because of the shortage of microchips. This is something that neither Donald Trump 1.0 nor Joe Biden had banked on. They thought that they would choke to death the Chinese big tech industry with their sanctions, with their CHIPS Act, effectively prohibiting them from making use of advanced microchips by NVIDIA, by others. And it had the exact opposite effect. Because the Chinese have an engineering tradition that the United States used to have, but haven't had since the 1970s, they threw lots of engineers at the problem. And if you look at Huawei, for instance, they managed, everybody thought, even I must confess, I expected Huawei to stop producing handsets, smartphones, after they lost their suppliers, their microchip suppliers. I was expecting them to go the way of Nokia, in the same way that Nokia was shut down by iPhone because they had not developed touch screens, and then at some point they became a communications company that didn't produce handsets. But look at Huawei. They sat down and they managed to squeeze enormous power out of old-fashioned microchips, and that can only be done with very sophisticated software. So we knew that they were good at software, but the DeepSeek phenomenon simply reinforced that. But isn't it interesting, and I think Arnaud has already written about this on Twitter, on X, maybe he can elaborate. Isn't it interesting how the funding came about? That is, DeepSeek was funded effectively by a hedge fund that was taking advantage of the attempts by the United States to squeeze Chinese finance out of the international financial game. And they learned tricks of the trade, how to extract rents from finance using very advanced, fast trading digital equipment. And they made money out of that, and they invested it. Not a lot of money was invested by American standards, but enough in order to combine the ingenuity and the high concept of their engineers. They thought about the problem very differently and much more smartly and wisely, and ended up being able to extract the performance that they got from DeepSeek at a fraction of the cost of OpenAI.
Thank you. Yanis, as I hand it to you, Arnaud, on that topic of performance, you said, or I think you've written that that the moat for US AI companies was their compute, their servers, the chips that they didn't want China to have, etc. So if they've now figured out in China a way to get so much more performance from so much little compute, why wouldn't America, with its greater compute, just throw all that compute at the open source model of DeepSeek, make it closed source, and then leapfrog DeepSeek? Explain that to me, with my non-expert view.
Yeah, no, you're totally right, and I fully expect the US to do that. But I think that one very interesting point is that right now, DeepSeek for the inference part, meaning not the training of the model, but once the model is trained, when the model answers the question, that can run on Huawei chips, the Huawei Ascent series, for more or less the same price as they initially announced when they released DeepSeek R1, the latest model, price which is 1/30th of OpenAI, of their API. And again, that's the price if you use the API of DeepSeek. You can also use it for free when you download the open source version. So the fact that they can run the model, the inference part, which is by far what uses the most compute, because think about the millions of people that use a model and all the calculation it needs to make. The fact that they can now run that on Chinese chips, China-produced chips, Huawei chips, for as cheap as they would with Western chips, means that China is really catching up in that regard as well, and it means that then it's somehow more and more a fair level playing field with the US, and may the best engineer win. And in that, I'm afraid that the US may be at a slight disadvantage. And on this, on human talent, on what Yanis was saying earlier, I think the fact that it comes from a hedge fund is particularly interesting, because also a few months ago, less than 1 year ago, there was new regulation in China in order to sort of crack down on overly high compensation in the financial industry, with the notion that they didn't want basically to do the same mistake as the US, where if you look at MIT graduates, Harvard graduates, all the Ivy League students, a very large proportion of them go to work in finance. They go to work for hedge funds, they go to work for the big banks and so on, in order to produce ever more complex financial derivative products and so on, which if you look at the impact on society, you can't exactly say that it's improving our collective, it's improving the common good. And I think that was the thinking behind China's move, which is not to destroy the banking industry or forbid hedge fund and so on. It's basically to say, we don't want that sector, which generates a lot of money, to monopolize all the top brains of China. We want some guys to work on, AI as well. And, lo and behold, a few months after, you have a hedge fund that reconverts into AI. So it may just be a coincidence, but I think it's also symbolic.
Thank you, Arnaud. And a little nugget here that China graduates more engineers and scientists than the top 5 Western countries combined. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I would like us to shift, if possible, to what can we do if anything? How do we stop AI from becoming a tool of corporate and state control now that there is a path opened up towards open AI, not OpenAI the company, but open source AI? Is there any concrete steps that activists or developers or policymakers can push for that kind of open path to resist monopolization that was the fever dream of Silicon Valley just a couple of weeks ago? Yanis, I think you're muted. Yeah, go for it.
It's all a matter of legislation. The neoliberals or liberals got it right from the beginning when they were saying that the A and the Z, the beginning and the end of capitalism, is property rights. And we Marxists, speaking for myself at least, agree. It's all about who owns what, not who knows what, but who owns what. So the question is, who owns those technologies? If they're owned by the 0.001%, then at best you can have regulation like Arnaud was talking about, pushing down their remuneration, their capacity to extract surplus value from the rest of the economy. But I very much fear that this is very limited. The state eventually will be captured, or that gives exorbitant power to bureaucrats to try to suppress the incomes, the profit-taking, the rent-seeking behavior of the 0.001% that owns this amazing capacity, not only to produce things, but to modify your behavior, because this is what cloud capital does. So, we're going back to the original discussion within the left of 100 years ago. Remember, there was a split of the left 100 years ago, or thereabouts, between the social democrats who believed in civilizing capitalism by having regulation, by having a state that intervenes and stops the capitalists from accumulating too much wealth or taking a part of it and using it in order to pay for social welfare or to transfer wages or income to wage earners, and the Marxists who believed that any such attempt is doomed to fail, even if it's well-meaning, and the only way of pushing society forward so that technology becomes our slave rather than our master is for technology and the means of production to be socialized on the basis of worker control. The workers in an AI company, in a aluminium producing company, should be the ones who make the decisions about the company and who are actually equal shareholders. One person, one vote. And I think that, if anything, cloud capital, the rise of the techno-feudal lords, AI is powerfully strengthening and reinforcing the radical argument. The argument that the dream of a social democracy where regulation tempers the capacity to accumulate by the very, very few, this dream has become a delusion. It's toxic. It can never work, especially with the global nature of cloud capital, that it doesn't stop at the borders of your state, of your nation, of your community. So the answer must be smart ways of organizing production along the lines of common ownership, of recreating commons, recreating or creating for the first time companies that are, let me put it in a very old-fashioned 1930s term, which I actually have a great deal of sympathy for, anarcho-syndicalism. The idea that it's neither the state nor the big business that runs the businesses. The businesses are run by the people who are actually doing the work, whether this is mental work or manual work.
Thank you, Yanis. Arnaud, I'd love your take on this, and AI is a public good.
Yes, so I think we are having a preview of how dystopian things can get with the OpenAI DeepSeek story. I don't know if you followed the so-called distillation debate, where OpenAI accused DeepSeek of training its model on the output of ChatGPT. But what that means is that OpenAI sees the output of its model as something that is its property that cannot be used however users want. So it's owned. They have it comes with string attached basically. Like if they don't like how you use it, they can complain about it or sue you or something like that. And that might not sound like a big deal, but I think it is actually a very big deal. If you think about what AI may become, it might become a absolutely central part of our lives. It might become a tool for that we use. Everyone uses throughout the day, where that we will use for everything. So every time anyone wants to create a company, for instance, you will use AI as a central tool, like commodity to do it. And think about a world where the output of those AI is not fully owned by you. Then you can rapidly arrive at a situation where those AI giants, if we move towards a closed model for AI, might say, you know what, there is this new business. I don't like what they're doing because it might compete with some of my interests or the interests of my friends. So I will say that I disapprove of this use. On bit by bit, you have those big AI giants kind of shaping the direction of society, shaping knowledge itself, of course, as well, because a lot of the knowledge will be extracted from a lot of the narratives. The way we understand the world will come from those models. So I think that what Yanis is saying is right. It's very much something that it will look scary if a bunch of oligarchs, AI giants were to own that, and we need to have a way where the ownership of this is democratized, is distributed. And I think that is fundamentally what open source is about. It's having models which are free, which anyone can use, transform as they wish, with zero strings attached. So basically an AI created by humanity, by us collectively, for humanity, democratized, developed collectively, as opposed to closed by a small number of actors. Another point I think that is very important is inequality between countries, because you can very much imagine that, and I think that was to a large extent the US's plan, where that's still what they're very much trying to do, to be the first to arrive at AGI, this sort of final state of AI where it is the most more intelligent than all of us, and that will give it enormous geopolitical competitive advantage and much more power than the rest of the world, which is great probably for the US, but not that great for the rest of the world, right? And you can see how that will deeply widen the inequalities between the haves, those who have those technologies, so the US, maybe its close allies, and those who don't. And I'd much rather a future where we have an AI that unites the world rather than divides it, and bridges inequalities rather than widen them. And again, I think open source is a big part of the answer for that. Like take DeepSeek, for instance. Anyone, say in Africa now, can download the model and find a use for it for their own community for free, which is great. But the one danger with open source is AI remains a very powerful tool that could indeed become something more intelligent than us. And so we want an AI that no country or monopoly controls, but we also importantly want an AI that doesn't control us, right? So we will need to have some sort of international coordination, maybe something close to how the internet is governed with distributed protocols, standard bodies, in order to achieve that, to ensure that AI remains within our control as opposed to something that can potentially control us. The critical challenge there is achieving this without creating a bureaucracy that could itself become a bottleneck or a point of control. But I think we have some models for that, so it hopefully should be doable.
Thank you, Arnaud, and such a rational approach to the kind of doom scenario that you outlined there, because that was some of the rationale for why OpenAI in the beginning switched to closed AI, wasn't it? That we have to take care because this could kill us all. AGI, then ASI, so therefore we're going to not work in public. A couple of quick comments here from the chat, and then I'll hand it to Yanis and then to Arnaud for closing thoughts. Alexandra Barnes says, I do like to keep reminding people that AI has got nothing to do with what we generally understand intelligence to be, but it is a neutral tool that can be used for good or ill like any other tool. Skylar Jones says, American tech billionaires are self-serving. They're about maximizing personal profits and forming monopolies, not about doing things for the good of the people or the planet. Red Note notes that DeepSeek currently has the cheapest and most user-friendly all-round algorithm model in the world, and the youngest team members definitely agree with that in terms of user friendliness, especially when you can see its thought process. It's almost endearing and a little scary, but quite interesting to use it. So if anyone hasn't tried it, deepseek.com, give it a shot. And Poros says, anyone who still uses ChatGPT deserves to lose their job to AI.
That's a good one.
Yanis, closing thoughts for you.
I like that last comment. It's absolutely right. Look, two thoughts. First, like every spanking new technology, it is scary and it is exhilarating. Imagine this was the 18th century and you came across the first James Watt steam engine. What would you think? That this is a brilliant thing or a terrible thing? The Luddites had it completely right. By the way, the Luddites were never against the machines. They were never against the technology. They were against the way that the machines, the steam engines, was being used in order to expropriate them, in order to impoverish them. And if they smashed the machines up, it's not because they hated the machines or they believed in a machine-less world, but they believed in a world in which the machines are slaves, not our masters. And I think that applies to whether it's the steam engine, the industrial robot, or indeed AI. That's the first thought. The second thought goes a bit further by saying that when it comes to services like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, I think they're splendid. It is even, DeepSeek is even splendid there because it's free and it's open source. But they're great. I use them all the time. And of course, you have to use them critically like every other tool. But I don't think the main game is there in those services. The main game is what happens inside the platforms of Google, of Uber, of the big tech, what I call the cloudalist sector or the techno-feudal sector. And that's where AI, reinforcement learning algorithms and so on, can create, generate, produce gigantic new extractive powers for the owners of these machines. And if we're going to ensure that these technological innovations benefit humanity, then we need to make sure that the property rights are redistributed from the very, very few to the many, to those who actually work with them, those who use them, turn them into a cloud commons.
Thank you, Yanis. Arnaud, closing thoughts from you.
So one closing thought would be, I think it's important, there is this sentence that says, the whoever controls the narrative controls you, and it's important that we collectively have the right narrative on AI. So for instance, we need to resist attempts to frame AI as a weapon or an arms race or a tool of geopolitics, because I think all of that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we risk, because of that, we risk shaping AI with the very sort of conflict and divide that we seek to escape. So I think we need to manage to develop an alternative narrative on AI, which is always difficult to do with our media environment. But I think it's important. What narrative do we have of an AI that is good for humanity, that promotes fights inequality, that will be good for the world rather than something that will further divide us. And so I don't have the answer for that. But I think it's important that we think a lot about those questions. And again, also back to Yanis' point, it's also critical to remember that at the end of the day, it is not AI per se that's important, is what we're going to do with it. Again, it is just a technology and enabler, and it's also very important to think about that. And AI is only going to be a force for good if we build things that have a positive impact on the world with it.
Thank you, Arnaud. Well said. Thank you, Yanis. And thank you to you out there. That, I think, was a fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot. I hope you guys out there have too. Thank you for your questions and comments. If you'd like to keep in touch with what we're doing, hit the bell icon in YouTube to be notified of whenever we put a new video there. If you'd like to donate to us, we have no big backers, only small donations. Please go to dm25.org/donate. If you'd like to join us, we are a political movement, then please go to dm25.org/join, and you can roll up your sleeves and get stuck in. Thank you again to our panel and you out there. And we will see you not at the same time. We'll see you at 6 p.m. CET. Same place 2 weeks from now. Take care.